Why women cheat. 6. Brutal reasons. Men never see coming. According to Machiavelli, you've felt it before, haven't you? That moment when the ground beneath your feet transforms into quicksand, when the woman you thought you knew becomes a stranger wearing a familiar face. The shock doesn't come from the betrayal itself, it comes from the realization that you've been living in a carefully constructed illusion, mistaking performance for truth, confusing proximity for intimacy. The hollow eyes staring back at you in the mirror belonged to a man who believed loyalty was earned through consistency, devotion purchased through sacrifice, fidelity secured through trust. You gave everything. You provided everything. You trusted everything. And in that totality of giving, you created the very conditions for your own destruction. This is not about fairness. This is not about justice. This is about laws that operate beyond your conscious awareness, patterns that govern human behavior with the inevitability of gravity. Niccolo Machiavelli understood these laws 5 centuries ago, not as moral choices, but as psychological inevitabilities. While you focused on being good, others mastered being effective. You see, betrayal doesn't happen to kings. It happens to subjects. It doesn't target the powerful. It devours the powerless. It doesn't strike the mysterious. It destroys the predictable. And somewhere in your journey from man to provider, from lover to security system, from mystery to manual, you transformed yourself into the perfect victim. The woman lying beside you didn't wake up one morning and decide to destroy your world. She responded to invisible currents you created, psychological vacuums you established, emotional territories you abandoned. While you were building what you thought was a fortress of love, you were actually constructing a prison of predictability. Every text you sent immediately, every feeling you shared completely, every boundary you dissolved willingly, every time you asked permission instead of claiming authority, every moment you sought her validation instead of trusting your own judgment. Each act of what you called love was actually an act of self-erasure. You confused transparency with intimacy, availability with value, servitude with devotion. You believed that making yourself completely known would make you completely loved. But you forgot the fundamental law of human psychology. What can be completely controlled generates no respect. What commands no respect creates no desire. What creates no desire invites replacement. The brutal truth you're not ready to hear is this: she didn't betray the man you are. She betrayed the man you became. The man who stopped growing. The man who stopped challenging her. The man who stopped being worthy of her respect, let alone her loyalty. While you were focused on loving her harder, someone else was focused on being harder to forget. While you were trying to prove your worth through constant availability, someone else was demonstrating his value through strategic scarcity. While you were building your identity around her approval, someone else was building his around his own unshakable purpose. You watch, confused and devastated, as the months or years of your devotion evaporate in the face of his weeks or days of magnetism. This isn't about fairness. This is about understanding the invisible architecture of attraction, the hidden mechanics of desire, the secret laws that govern who commands loyalty and who becomes disposable. The comfortable lie you tell yourself is that he's manipulative, that she's shallow, that love should be enough. But these are the desperate rationalizations of the defeated. The uncomfortable truth is that you stopped being a man worth betraying yourself for, let alone worth being loyal to. Machiavelli knew that power ignored is power transferred. Respect undemanded is respect denied. Authority unexercised is authority lost. And somewhere in your noble intention to love without condition, you taught her that your conditions didn't matter. Your boundaries were negotiable. Your worth was optional. The question that haunts your sleepless nights isn't why she did it. The question is why you made it inevitable, why you created the psychological conditions that made betrayal not just possible, but probable. Why you transformed from someone she couldn't imagine leaving into someone she couldn't imagine staying with. The shock will pass, the pain will fade, but the lesson, if you're brave enough to learn it, will transform everything. Because once you understand the invisible laws that govern loyalty and betrayal, you can never again confuse being good with being effective, loving with being lovable, giving with being valuable. The choice is yours, but choosing ignorance will not change the rules of the game. You think abundance means giving everything. You think provision means constant availability. You think love means the endless offering of yourself on an altar of her approval. But you've confused feeding with nourishing, presence with impact, quantity with quality. She's starving. Not for food, not for shelter, not for the comfortable predictability you've wrapped around her life like a suffocating blanket. She's starving for something you stopped providing the moment you became completely, utterly, predictably available. You text her every thought. You share every feeling. You make every decision a committee vote where her opinion carries more weight than your own conviction. You've opened every door in your soul and wonder why she's looking for mysteries elsewhere. You've given her complete access to your inner world and can't understand why she craves territories you cannot provide. This is the brutal paradox you refuse to accept. Emotional availability creates emotional poverty. Constant presence breeds unconscious absence. Total transparency generates invisible emptiness. You've confused exposure with intimacy, and in that confusion, you've created the very starvation you thought you were preventing. Machiavelli understood that humans are drawn to what they cannot fully possess, obsessed with what they cannot completely control, fascinated by what they cannot entirely predict. You've made yourself completely possessible, entirely controllable, utterly predictable, and in doing so, you've transformed from a mystery worth exploring into a manual she's already read. Every morning she knows exactly what you'll say. Every evening she can predict precisely how you'll respond. Every conversation follows the same pattern of your eager validation-seeking and her diminishing enthusiasm. You've become emotional fast food, immediately available, ultimately unsatisfying, easily replaceable. But somewhere else, someone operates differently. Someone who doesn't empty his emotional pockets onto her table. Someone who maintains kingdoms of experience she can only glimpse from the borders. Someone who responds when it serves his purpose, not when it serves her impatience. Someone who grants access to his inner world as a privilege, not a right. You watch, confused and devastated, as she gravitates toward this different energy. You tell yourself he's distant, unavailable, emotionally immature. These are the comfortable lies of the emotionally bankrupt. The truth is more devastating. He understands scarcity creates value, while abundance destroys it. You've trained her to take your attention for granted because you've made it impossible to earn. You've taught her to undervalue your presence because you've made it impossible to lose. You've shown her that your emotional world has no boundaries, no standards, no requirements for entry. And the human psyche, masculine or feminine, cannot respect what it doesn't have to earn. The wrong kind of presence is worse than absence. The wrong kind of availability is more damaging than distance. The wrong kind of giving creates more emptiness than withholding. You've been so afraid of being emotionally unavailable that you've become emotionally worthless. Think about the difference between water and wine. Water is essential, constantly available, taken for granted. Wine is precious, carefully stored, saved for moments that matter. You've made yourself water when she craves wine. Necessary but never celebrated. Required but never treasured. She doesn't want to solve you in a single conversation. She wants to discover you across seasons. She doesn't want to know everything about you immediately. She wants the slow unveiling of layers that reveal themselves only when earned. She doesn't want your complete emotional world served on a platter. She wants to feel that accessing your deeper territories is an achievement, not an accident. But you've confused love with the dissolution of all boundaries. You've mistaken intimacy for the elimination of all mystery. You've believed that sharing everything creates connection when it actually creates suffocation. You've opened every door and wonder why she's looking for locked rooms elsewhere. The man who fascinates her understands something you've forgotten. Emotional hunger is more powerful than emotional satisfaction. Psychological tension creates more desire than psychological comfort. Strategic withholding generates more fascination than strategic revelation. You've been feeding her soul empty calories, constantly available but ultimately malnourishing. Meanwhile, someone else offers rare delicacies, scarce, significant, memorable. You provide emotional junk food, he provides emotional cuisine. The starvation you've created isn't from lack of love, it's from the wrong kind of love. Not from emotional absence, but from emotional abundance that lacks boundaries, standards, or requirements. You've loved without condition and wonder why she seeks someone who loves with sovereignty. She's not betraying your abundance. She's abandoning your emptiness disguised as provision. She's not leaving what you give. She's seeking what you've forgotten how to withhold. You ask permission for everything, permission to speak your mind. Permission to make decisions. Permission to exist in your own space without apology. You've abdicated the throne of your own life and wonder why no one treats you like royalty. She doesn't betray kings. She abandons subjects. Look at yourself now. Really look. When did you start asking, "Is this okay?" instead of stating, "This is how it will be"? When did you begin polling her for approval instead of trusting your own judgment? When did you transform from the architect of your own existence into a democracy of one, constantly seeking external validation to confirm your right to occupy the space you inhabit? You've confused love with submission. You've mistaken consideration for the complete surrender of your masculine authority. You've believed that asking permission for every breath makes you thoughtful when it actually makes you forgettable. Machiavelli understood something that destroys modern men. Respect is not given, it's commanded. Loyalty is not earned through servitude, it's inspired through sovereignty. Authority that must be announced is not authority at all. It's compensation for its absence. You negotiate with the world for scraps of recognition while somewhere else, another man operates from a position of inherent authority. You bend and compromise your desires to fit into spaces others have created, while he builds his own domain according to his own vision. You seek approval for your choices, while he makes decisions with the quiet confidence of someone who trusts his own judgment above all external opinions. Can you feel the difference? The energy shift when true sovereignty enters a room. Not the artificial dominance of insecure men who compensate for inner weakness with outer aggression, but the natural leadership of a man who has conquered his own inner chaos and emerged as the undisputed ruler of his own existence. You've spent years asking, "What do you think I should do?" He knows what he should do and does it without requiring committee approval. You've spent years saying, "Is this okay?" He acts with the assumption that his choices are not subject to external validation. You've spent years seeking permission to be yourself. He grants himself that permission and lives accordingly. This is why she gravitates toward him. Not because he dominates her, but because he cannot be dominated by his own weaknesses, fears, or impulses. Not because he controls her, but because she can trust that he controls himself. Not because he's a tyrant, but because he's a king who rules himself so completely that following his lead feels like the most natural thing in the world. Her feminine energy recognizes masculine authority on a cellular level. She relaxes in the presence of a man who can provide direction, stability, and protection, not through force, but through unshakable inner strength. She finds peace with someone who doesn't need her approval to validate his existence. But you've made her your parliament. You've turned every decision into a negotiation. You've transformed every choice into a committee vote where her opinion carries more weight than your own conviction. You've taught her that your authority is optional, your leadership is negotiable, your sovereignty is conditional on her consent. The brutal truth is this: you cannot lead someone who doesn't respect you. You cannot command loyalty from someone who sees you as weak. You cannot inspire devotion in someone who has watched you abandon your own throne. She doesn't want to be controlled. She wants to trust that you can control yourself. She doesn't want to be dominated. She wants to know that you cannot be dominated by circumstances, emotions, or the opinions of others. She doesn't want a tyrant. She wants a king whose strength doesn't depend on her weakness, whose confidence doesn't require her insecurity, whose authority doesn't demand her submission. You've confused sovereignty with selfishness, leadership with dictatorship, masculine authority with toxic domination. But sovereignty is not taking power from others. It's generating power from within. Leadership is not forcing others to follow. It's becoming worth following. Masculine authority is not controlling women. It's controlling yourself so completely that others naturally align with your direction. When she looks at you, does she see a man who governs his own kingdom? Or does she see someone still asking permission to sit on his own throne? Does she sense the quiet confidence of self-mastery? Or does she feel the anxious energy of someone who has never learned to trust his own judgment? The crown you seek is not given by others. It is claimed by those who understand that sovereignty is not a title, it is a way of being. And she will always be drawn to the man who wears his crown with such natural authority that she forgets other men exist. While you're still asking permission, he's already building the empire she wants to be part of. You reveal everything. Every thought that crosses your mind becomes a text message. Every feeling that stirs your heart becomes a confession. Every moment of your day becomes an open book she can read without effort. You believe this transparency makes you trustworthy, authentic, genuine. You think that showing her your complete inner world creates intimacy, but you have confused exposure with connection, availability with value, predictability with safety. What you call honesty, she experiences as suffocation. What you call openness, she perceives as weakness. What you call transparency, she feels as the death of intrigue. The human mind is designed to be captured by puzzles, not pamphlets, fascinated by depths that take time to explore, not shallows that can be traversed in a single conversation. Her imagination is ignited by what she cannot fully predict, not by what she can completely control. You empty your emotional pockets onto the table, desperate to prove your worth through complete disclosure. But somewhere else, another man curates his revelations like a master gallery owner. Each piece of himself that he shares is carefully selected, precisely timed, strategically positioned for maximum effect. He understands that mystery is not the absence of depth. It is depth that reveals itself in layers, in fragments, in moments that leave her wanting more. You text her every thought that crosses your mind. He responds when it serves his purpose, not when it serves her impatience. You share every detail of your day. He maintains entire kingdoms of experience that she can only glimpse from the borders. You make yourself completely known. He remains partially unknowable forever. This is not cruelty. This is psychological architecture. Consider the difference between a house with every door flung open and one with certain rooms that remain locked. Which commands more of your attention? Which creates more desire to explore? Which generates more respect for the owner's boundaries and more curiosity about what lies beyond them? Machiavelli understood that power lies not in what you reveal, but in what you reserve. Not in what you give freely, but in what must be earned. not in what you make obvious, but in what you leave to imagination. You wonder why she stops responding to your messages with the same enthusiasm she once showed. Why her interest dims as your availability increases. Why the more you give, the less she seems to value what you offer. You have made the fatal error of confusing quantity with quality, frequency with impact, transparency with depth. She does not want to solve you in a single sitting. She wants to discover you across seasons, across years, across the slow unveiling of layers that reveal themselves only when she has earned the right to see them. She wants to feel that knowing you is an achievement, not an accident. That understanding you is a journey, not a destination. The architect of mystery has learned what you resist accepting, that emotional unavailability is not the same as emotional absence. He is not withdrawn, he is selective. He is not cold, he is controlled. He is not distant, he is sovereign over his own inner world, granting access as a privilege rather than a right. When he speaks, his words carry weight because they are not cheapened by constant availability. When he shares a feeling, it resonates because it is not drowned in an ocean of oversharing. When he reveals a piece of his past, it becomes precious because it is rare, significant because it is chosen, memorable because it is scarce. You've made yourself a newspaper, updated daily, completely readable, ultimately disposable. He has made himself a rare manuscript, glimpsed occasionally, partially understood, eternally fascinating. The brutal paradox you refuse to accept is this. The moment she believes she has discovered everything there is to know about you, she will begin looking elsewhere for the mystery her soul craves. So he ensures that there is always another door, another layer, another dimension of himself that remains tantalizingly out of reach. Your complete transparency has made you completely forgettable. Your total availability has made you totally dismissible. Your endless revelation has created endless boredom. You've given her everything and wonder why she's hungry for nothing you can provide. He knows that the mind becomes obsessed with what it cannot fully grasp, possessed by what it cannot completely possess. You've made yourself fully graspable, completely possessible, utterly predictable. And in that completeness, you've created the very emptiness that drives her toward incompleteness elsewhere. This is how desire is sustained. This is how fascination is maintained. This is how a man becomes unforgettable instead of disposable. Not through revelation, but through reservation. Not through transparency, but through translucency. Not through giving everything, but through making everything earned. The man who holds nothing back often finds himself holding nothing at all. You've learned to disguise your stagnation as stability. You've convinced yourself that remaining unchanged is a virtue, that consistency equals strength. But deep in the chambers of your mind, you know the truth. You've become a monument to your own limitations. She doesn't leave growth. She abandons stagnation. Most men are archaeological sites, fixed, predictable. Their thoughts fossilized in patterns from decades past. Their dreams calcified into routine, their potential buried beneath layers of comfortable mediocrity. She can read you like a map she's traced 1,000 times before. You mistake evolution for instability. You confuse growth with chaos. This is why you remain invisible while others become inevitable. Machiavelli understood this principle intimately. The prince who adapts survives, but the prince who evolves conquers. Not through force, but through the irresistible magnetism of perpetual possibility. You've chosen survival while someone else has chosen transformation. When did you stop becoming? When did you crystallize yourself into a statue of your best moment, hoping it would be enough? When did you decide that who you are today is who you'll be forever? When did you start defending your limitations instead of transcending them? She's watching. She's always watching. Not your achievements. Those impress other men. She's watching your trajectory, your evolution, your expansion into territories you've never explored. She's measuring whether you're growing toward something greater or shrinking into something smaller. You've spent months, maybe years, maintaining your position while someone else has been creating new territories. You've been preserving your image while he's been destroying and rebuilding his reality. You've been protecting who you are while he's been designing who he's becoming. The difference isn't just attractive, it's gravitational. She doesn't want to witness your stagnation. She wants to participate in your transformation. She doesn't want to manage your limitations. She wants to explore your possibilities. She doesn't want to comfort your fears. She wants to celebrate your courage to become someone you've never been before. But you've become predictable, safe, knowable, a finished equation with no variables left to solve, a completed puzzle with no mystery remaining, a closed book with no new chapters to discover. He carries the scent of unfinished business with himself. Always one project away from a breakthrough. Always one insight away from a revolution. Always one choice away from becoming someone she's never met before. This creates a psychological addiction. She doesn't just want to be with him. She needs to witness what he becomes next. You've been taught that change is weakness, that admitting ignorance is failure, that growth requires the humiliation of being wrong. So you've built walls around your identity, defending positions that no longer serve you, protecting beliefs that no longer challenge you, maintaining habits that no longer grow you. Meanwhile, he treats his identity as clay, not concrete. He approaches his beliefs as hypotheses, not dogma. He views his limitations as temporary assignments, not permanent addresses. Every conversation with him feels like stepping into a different universe. Every interaction promises a version of herself she's never dared to imagine. This is the deepest form of seduction. Not the conquest of her body, but the invitation to transcend her limitations. Not the capture of her attention, but the expansion of her possibilities. Not the satisfaction of her current desires, but the creation of desires she didn't know she possessed. You remain the same man she met, hoping that sameness will eventually wear her down into acceptance. But he offers her something infinitely more dangerous. The possibility that she could become someone she's only dreamed of being. She's spent her entire life around men who stopped evolving the moment they believed they had earned her attention. Static, predictable, safe. But safety is the opposite of desire. Comfort is the enemy of fascination. Certainty is the assassin of attraction. You've confused being finished with being polished. You've mistaken completion for perfection. You've believed that becoming a final product makes you valuable when it actually makes you obsolete. The brutal truth you're avoiding is this: she's not drawn to what you are. She's intoxicated by what you're becoming. And if you're not becoming anything, if you're not expanding into new territories of possibility, if you're not challenging yourself to grow beyond who you were yesterday, then you're not just stagnating, you're dying, and she can smell death from miles away. The question isn't whether you're good enough as you are. The question is whether you're brave enough to become who you could be. Because while you're defending who you are, someone else is designing who he's becoming, and she's choosing transformation over stagnation, evolution over preservation, possibility over certainty, every single time. You've felt it before, that hollow ache when you realize you've been living for her validation instead of your own vision. That moment when you understand why she loses interest the instant you make her your entire world. She doesn't betray men with purpose. She abandons men who've lost theirs. There's a fundamental difference between the man who seeks a woman to complete him and the man who invites her to witness his completion of something far greater. One begs for attention. The other commands it without asking. When did you stop building worlds and start maintaining relationships? When did you trade your sacred mission for the desperate pursuit of her approval? When did you transform from an architect of possibility into a caretaker of her emotions? You see, there's something that burns brighter than any temporary flame of romance. A sacred fire that existed before she arrived and will continue long after she's gone. But you extinguished yours the moment you made her your religion instead of your partner in something eternal. Machiavelli understood that power without purpose is merely performance. Leadership without direction is just noise. Strength without mission is only posturing. And the man who lives for a woman's approval, rather than his own calling, unconsciously, teaches her to look elsewhere for the kind of directed masculine energy that creates worlds rather than merely maintaining them. She can sense it immediately. The difference between a man who carries sacred fire and one who's traded his flame for the illusion of romantic security. The way you move through space, no longer with quiet certainty, but with the anxious energy of someone whose worth depends entirely on her response. Conversations with you used to feel like stepping into a cathedral. Now they feel like sitting in a coffee shop, mundane and forgettable. Your presence once suggested mysteries she couldn't solve by batting her eyelashes or playing familiar games. Now you're completely solvable, entirely manageable, utterly controllable. You've confused love with the dissolution of your identity. You've mistaken devotion for the abandonment of your deepest truth. You've believed that making her your purpose creates intimacy when it actually creates contempt. The keeper of sacred fire operates from a different philosophy entirely. His romantic love is not his religion. It's a beautiful expression of his already complete spiritual life, not the foundation upon which that life is built. She enhances his journey. She doesn't become his destination. Watch how differently he moves through the world. His conversations don't seek her approval. They invite her into something larger than both of them. His energy doesn't depend on her validation. It flows from an internal source that no rejection can destroy. His worth isn't tied to her response because his mission doesn't require her participation. This creates a paradox she cannot resist. The man who needs her least becomes the one she wants most. You stop asking permission to be powerful. You stop apologizing for taking up space. You stop dimming your light to make others comfortable. Instead, you become a force of nature she can choose to dance with or watch from a distance, but she cannot ignore. But you've made her your purpose. Instead of including her in your purpose, you've traded your sacred calling for the desperate pursuit of her comfort. You've abandoned the very qualities that made you worth choosing in the first place. She doesn't want to be your mission. She wants to be chosen by a man who already has one. When you serve something greater than yourself, whether it's art, truth, healing, creation, or spiritual awakening, you develop an unshakable confidence that no rejection can destroy. Your identity remains intact because it was forged in solitude, in service to something eternal, not built from the fragile foundation of another person's approval. The sacred fire burns whether she feeds it or not. And in that independence, she finds something she didn't know she was looking for. A man whose strength doesn't depend on her weakness, whose joy doesn't require her suffering, whose love doesn't demand her sacrifice of self. You've spent months, maybe years, asking, what makes her happy, instead of, what makes me come alive? You've focused on becoming what she wants, instead of becoming who you're meant to be. You've built your entire identity around her approval and wonder why she's looking for someone who doesn't need it. When you carry sacred fire, romance becomes collaboration instead of codependency. She joins your mission not because you need her to, but because she's inspired by what you're building. She becomes your partner in purpose, not your substitute for it. The question isn't whether you're worthy of her attention. The question is whether she's worthy of witnessing the sacred fire you carry. But first, you have to remember how to light it again. Because the man who serves sacred fire doesn't just attract women. He attracts the kind of woman who recognizes sacred fire when she sees it. The brutality ends here. Not because the laws have changed, but because you have. You've seen the invisible architecture that governs loyalty and betrayal. You've witnessed the psychological currents that create the conditions for devotion or destruction. You've confronted the uncomfortable truth that relationships are not accidents. They are reflections of your inner state, mirrors of your spiritual condition, consequences of your conscious choices. This knowledge carries a weight that will either crush you or forge you into something unbreakable. The choice is yours. The path forward is not about controlling women. It's not about manipulating outcomes. It's not about becoming someone you're not to prevent what you fear. It's about becoming so authentically powerful, so genuinely sovereign, so completely self-possessed that betrayal becomes impossible, not because you've eliminated the possibility, but because you've eliminated the psychological conditions that make it inevitable. Sovereignty is not a strategy. It's a way of being. You begin by reclaiming the throne of your own existence. Every decision you make without seeking external validation is an act of rebellion against the democracy you've created in your own life. Every boundary you establish and maintain is a declaration of war against the forces that would dissolve your identity. Every moment you trust your own judgment over the opinions of others is a step toward the kingdom you were meant to rule. The architect of mystery emerges when you stop emptying your soul for approval and start curating your revelations, like the precious resources they are. You speak when your words carry weight, not when silence feels uncomfortable. You share what serves the connection, not what serves your need to be completely known. You maintain territories of yourself that must be earned, not given freely to anyone who asks. The sovereign reclaims his authority by operating from internal validation rather than external approval. You make decisions based on your vision, not her comfort. You build your life according to your values, not her preferences. You grant permission to yourself and stop asking the world for what you already possess. The right to exist as you are, to want what you want, to pursue what calls to your deepest truth. The guardian of sacred boundaries understands that everything valuable in this world is protected. Your time, your attention, your emotional world, your inner sanctum, these become temples that require reverence to enter. You say no without explanation, yes without apology, and maybe when the situation demands careful consideration. The agent of transformation never stops becoming. You treat your identity as clay, not concrete. Your beliefs as hypotheses, not dogma. Your limitations as temporary assignments, not permanent addresses. You evolve not to impress others, but because growth is the natural expression of a life fully lived. The keeper of sacred fire remembers that romantic love is an expression of your already complete spiritual life, not the foundation upon which that life is built. You carry purpose that transcends any single relationship, mission that outlasts any individual connection, fire that burns whether or not someone else feeds it. This is not about becoming someone else. This is about remembering who you were before. The world taught you to ask permission for your own existence, before you learned to seek validation for your inherent worth, before you confused love with the dissolution of your boundaries. The woman who recognizes this energy, who sees the sovereign, respects the mystery, honors the boundaries, celebrates the growth, reverences the sacred fire. She doesn't betray this kind of man. She protects him. She supports his mission. She enhances his journey without becoming his destination. But the transformation begins with you, in solitude. In the quiet moments when you choose internal authority over external approval, when you decide that your respect for yourself matters more than anyone else's opinion of you, when you understand that the crown you seek is not given by others, it is claimed by those brave enough to wear it. The path is not easy. Sovereignty never is. It requires the daily choice to trust yourself over the crowd, to value your judgment over their comfort, to honor your truth over their expectations. But every step toward genuine masculine power is a step away from the psychological conditions that create betrayal. Every moment of authentic sovereignty is a moment of becoming betrayal-proof. The question is not whether you can prevent betrayal. The question is whether you can become the kind of man who makes loyalty inevitable. The choice is yours, but choosing sovereignty will change everything. Description: she doesn't betray kings, she abandons subjects. The psychological laws of power in love. You gave everything, and in doing so, you became nothing to her. This video is a psychological exorcism for the man who once thought that devotion guaranteed loyalty, that transparency built intimacy, that provision proved worth. But Machiavelli warned us centuries ago, the world does not reward goodness. It respects sovereignty. You'll confront the haunting realization that you were not betrayed for being bad, but for being powerless. This is your reckoning and your rebirth. In this emotionally searing exploration, we break down the laws of psychological power, emotional sovereignty, and masculine individuation. This is shadow work for the soul-starved. It's not about becoming more for her. It's about becoming whole for yourself. Learn the difference between mystery and manipulation, strength and domination, presence and performance. Reclaim your sacred fire. In this video, you'll uncover why radical transparency breeds emotional starvation, how devotion without boundaries becomes self-erasure, the Machiavellian truth about loyalty, power, and perception, how to embody mystery without manipulation, what sovereign masculinity feels like in a room, how to become psychologically unfuckwithable, the magnetic force of a man on his mission, why she leaves caretakers and follows architects of destiny. If this awakened something deep inside you, like, share, and subscribe. Not for algorithms. For your own resurrection. Because while others ask for permission, you were born to reclaim your crown. Tags: why women cheat psychology, reasons women cheat Machiavelli, betrayal in relationships, psychological reasons for infidelity, emotional storytelling betrayal, why she lost interest, Machiavellian philosophy relationships, male self-sabotage in love, heartbreak and self-awareness, emotional transparency in men, masculine energy versus weakness, why loyalty fails men, sovereign masculinity, power dynamics in relationships, emotional, seduction psychology, emotional abundance versus boundaries, evolution versus stagnation in men, why she chose someone else, predictable men versus mysterious men, why men get betrayed, understanding female desire, why love isn't enough, psychological attraction triggers, heartbreak and rebirth, emotional storytelling, infidelity, karma in relationships, toxic vulnerability. In men, self-awareness after betrayal, Machiavelli on power and love, emotional weakness repels desire. Images: a man stands in a quiet room, staring at a mirror that reflects a stranger with his face. The woman he once knew walks away, her silhouette unrecognizable in the fog of revelation. He kneels in the ruins of his own sacrifice, surrounded by the ashes of unreciprocated devotion. A crown lies untouched on a dusty table while he waits for permission to wear it. She fades into the distance, not because he failed to love her, but because he forgot how to lead. In the silence after her departure, he hears the echo of his own unanswered questions. A once bold architect of life now begs at the gates of his own kingdom for entry. She vanishes like mist from a mirror, leaving behind only the outline of a forgotten king. A hand reaches out to touch her heart, but it trembles, uncertain, unclaimed, unsovereign. The throne he built for her comfort now imprisons him in his own submission. His voice, once thunder, becomes a whisper waiting for her nod of approval. She dances to another rhythm now, one he cannot hear because he forgot to compose his own. He drowns in his own transparency, trying to swim in the ocean of her validation. A text message glows, In the dark, unread and unnecessary, his openness rendered obsolete. The storm outside rages, but inside he remains still, paralyzed not by fear, but permission. He stands in front of an open door, unable to walk through without her approval. A cathedral crumbles into a cafe. The sacred becomes ordinary in her eyes. He offers her everything, yet she walks away, craving what he refused to withhold. The fire in his soul dims, starved not of love, but of mystery. She watches from afar as he turns his power into a performance for her applause. The map she once traced is now predictable, the adventure replaced with routine. A man who once built empires now manages feelings, his mission lost in translation. The masculine lion has become a house cat, safe, tame, and utterly forgettable. A woman weeps, not from sorrow, but from the unbearable weight of his need. He speaks in complete sentences. She yearns for ellipses and unanswered questions. He stares at his reflection and whispers, "Is this okay?" A king dethroned by self-doubt. She leaves not with rage, but with reverence for the mystery he once was. He carves yes into every decision, erasing the sharp edges of his masculine truth. Her eyes no longer search him. They already know the ending. He confuses being present with being possessible, and she slips through his fingers like smoke. Her hunger isn't for his love, but for the boundaries he refuses to draw. He lives in a democracy of one, where every thought is voted on by her opinion. She watches his stillness and mourns the death of his becoming. The man who once inspired her now imitates himself, an echo instead of a presence. She walks past his fortress of comfort toward the wilderness of transformation. He mistakes vulnerability for revelation, bleeding truth until she's numb. He buries his purpose beneath layers of polite approval. The unfinished man burns with possibility. The finished one fades into irrelevance. His identity, once forged in fire, now rusts in the rain of her expectations. She doesn't betray him, she escapes him. His consistency becomes confinement, a rhythm too predictable to dance to. She craves the man who writes in ink, not the one who erases himself for her comfort. He speaks every feeling, every thought, a sacred silence sacrificed for accessibility. Her curiosity withers in the spotlight of his complete exposure. She was drawn to the flame, but he made it a fireplace, safe, warm, and dead. He confuses safety with sovereignty. Unaware, she dreams of danger laced with direction. While he texts her again, another man builds something worth inviting her into. She once looked at him like a story. Now he's a headline she's already read. In the space where mystery once lived, now resides only the echo of apologies.